And welcome back. Here we are at our very popular WorkZone Data Exchange update. I'm pleased to present to you Mr. Todd Peterson. Todd's the FHWA Office of Operations Lead for the WorkZone Data Exchange and for the Managing Disruptions to Operations Data Exchange. He's assembled a really wonderful group of panelists today, which you'll get to meet shortly. So I'm going to turn you over right now to Todd, give you the most time you can get. Todd?
Awesome. Thank you very much. Appreciate the introduction. I wanted to take the opportunity here to provide a brief update on from the federal perspective on the WorkZone Data Exchange, and then we're going to pivot directly into what we're really here for, which is discussion with our expert panel. So without further ado, let me get the slide deck out of the way, and we'll get into the discussion here. And trying to cursor into advancing slides, and there we go. So, just the quick background on WZDX. This was a collaboratively developed specification intended to address the need to have a means to articulate and communicate what's happening on the ground in terms of work zone activity. There's a lot of mechanisms for reporting that kind of thing within an organization via lane closure permitting, that sort of thing, but there was really no way to just communicate it on a more open fashion. So the WorkZone Data Exchange was established to provide that mechanism for a universal, cohesive standard to communicate work zone information. Originally, it's kind of developed around AV technology, but a variety of other use cases for within agencies and in research and all that. It goes well beyond just that. So there was a process that we got started in 2017, getting that going, and in the subsequent 7 years, we've come quite a long ways to achieve our ultimate goal of national coverage of work zone data reporting using the WZDX specification. And this next slide, for whatever reason, there we go. It's tad laggy, so I apologize for that. But this current map shows the state of play for work zone data exchange feeds that are being produced. We had a big milestone this year. We crossed into 25 states actively producing feeds. So we now have half the country plus the National Park Service actively producing work zone data exchange feeds. So that's pretty exciting. For 7 years, we got half the country in. Maybe another 5-7 years, we have the whole country. So, we'll look to that as a long-term stretch goal. The near-term focus, what we're looking at here is, if you look at this map, it's kind of cool. You can think about overlaying the national highway network on top of this, and you can imagine that we're pretty close to closing the gaps on some pretty key interstate corridors. So, one of our key focus areas is achieving transcontinental corridor integration of WZDX deployment on some key interstate corridors. We have a project specifically dealing with that, and I'll talk a little bit about that coming up. Longer term, and we'll get away from talking about work zones specifically here in a little bit, but we have an opportunity here to expand the WZDX concept to cover other non-recurring events. So that's a big focus of our office going forward. And I've included the link here at the bottom for the feed registry. If you really want to try to write it down, I might just recommend Googling WZDX feed registry. It's probably easier that way. So I had another slide in here coming up. There it is. I just wanted to, let you know what our program is doing concerning what we're calling MDODE, or the Managing Disruptions Operations Data Exchange, which is kind of the next step in the evolution of WZDX, where we're taking that same concept for work zones and applying it to all non-recurring events. So we have a number of projects here. The needs and opportunities task listed here is providing kind of the first step of that systems engineering approach and developing a needs assessment. Then the FY23 project underway is taking the next step into developing a concept of operations and a blueprint, and looking at, what are the long-term ownership and management implications for, this type of operations data exchange. We have another project which I mentioned is, specifically looking at closing those gaps on the interstate corridors, so that the corridor deployment support task is something we just kicked off. And we have two other tasks that are a joint effort between our office and the ITS JPO. The first is the data standardization support, which is looking specifically at integrating road weather and traffic incident emergency response type events using a work zone data exchange type common specification. So where we'd like to be with this in the future is, it's great to report work zone activity, but if you're managing work zones, it's also helpful to know what's going on in terms of, weather events and how those might be affecting regional operations in the vicinity of work zones. And similarly for traffic incidents, if there's something nearby or, something like that, that's important to know and becomes part of the operational management strategy for work zones when there's, incidents or emergency response activity in the area. And then finally, we're looking at a user interface type tool to facilitate the sandboxing of all this data. So, once the feeds are produced and the data's out there, it's, to make it easier to do something with it and to play with it for research cases. We're looking at building the requirements for a user interface that, you can go online and, query the data, maybe do a geofence type analysis. The idea is you ought to be able to look at a map and kind of see where all the work zones are at any given point. So with that, I think that concludes my formal presentation, and I'm excited to lean into there we go. So I think if I can get the panelists to come back online here, I'll introduce everybody and we'll get started with the discussion. Perfect. Okay, so let me introduce today's panelists. Dr. Stephen Parker is the, you want to give us a wave, Stephen? There we are. Dr. Stephen Parker is the Managing Director of the Traffic Operations and Safety Laboratory, or the TOPS Lab, at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. In this capacity, he has led a range of research and development initiatives for the TOPS Lab and its partner agencies across several core areas, including transportation safety, work zone systems, traffic management systems, and connected and automated vehicle technologies. Next, I want to introduce Neil Boudreau. Mr. Boudreau is Assistant Administrator of Traffic and Safety at Massachusetts DOT. Throughout his 30-year career, he has championed traffic engineering with a focus on operations and safety. He's led MassDOT's deployment of a WZDX feed as an early adopter of the WZDX specification, and was an influential champion for development of the WZDX hardware interface feed specification. All right, next up, Mark Mockett is an engineer at the US DOT Volpe Center, supporting ITS JPO and federal highway projects centered around connected and automated vehicles, intelligent transportation systems, and operational data. Among these projects is the Work Zone Data Exchange project, for which he serves as the primary liaison for coordinating the addition of and maintaining the accessibility of agency feeds on the WZDX feed registry. Next up is Skylar Knickerbocker. Mr. Knickerbocker is a researcher and co-director of the Real-Time Analytics and Transportation, or REACTOR Laboratory. That's an interesting name. He works primarily in the areas of traffic operations, maintenance, and safety, including data analytics, data visualization, and big data management, assisting with several research projects for the Iowa Department of Transportation, Minnesota Department of Transportation, Strategic Highway Research Program, and Federal Highway Administration. And finally, we have Kapil Dariani. Mr. Dariani is a technical project manager for the San Francisco Bay Area Metropolitan Transportation Commission, or MTC, and is the technical lead for MTC's WZDX system, along with mapping data services platform and regional ITS architecture system. So thank you to the panelists for attending today. I'm excited to hear what everybody has got to talk about. And if you've got a few questions, so I'll kind of throw the questions out there, and invite you all to have your input on it. So the first first question I want to throw out there is, I'd like to give each of you an opportunity to tell me a little bit more about your role in your agency and how WZDX has changed or influenced work zone management just in your day-to-day operations. So let me get started with, I'm going to go left to right in the camera here. So we'll start with Neil.
All right, thanks, Todd. And as you mentioned in my bio, I've been with MassDOT in serving in traffic operations and safety since day one of my career. And part of that has always been focused on work zone management, ensuring that we carefully plan out how we build our projects and maintain efficiency with traffic flow, but also protecting the people driving to work zone and the men and women working on the project. So that was one of the catalysts of me getting involved in the work zone data exchange early on. I wanted to put plans in place to better track our work zone locations, improve the quality of the data that we are capturing, what's happening when and where. And one of the key reasons was we're an avid user of smart work zones. And what we wanted to do is be able to kind of have a uniform platform that showed our work zones and where we had those devices out. So that's kind of the background of my story.
Awesome, thank you. We'll go next to Skylar, and I know the question is sort of agency focused, so I guess I'll ask Skylar, maybe you can speak to in your interactions with Iowa DOT or one of the other agencies that you guys work with, from that perspective.
Yep. Yeah, so Skylar Knickerbocker, researcher at Iowa State University, and so I've really helped Iowa DOT in terms of a lot of their work zone management, and specific to that is their data management and all the data that they're collecting either from the field staff or from working with contractors and manufacturers. And so a critical part of that is work zone data exchange, where we wanted to have that ability to standardize our data, both of what we're pushing out to the public as well as what we're receiving as an agency or as the Iowa DOT from these connected devices. So the work zone data exchange has been foundational for a lot of these efforts, and continuing to pursue those and push those into the future.
Excellent, thanks. Stephen Parker, you're next, and I guess the same caveat I'd give to you, with Wisconsin DOT and your interactions with them, or anybody else that you can think of.
Sure. Yep. So, as Todd noted, I'm with the University of Wisconsin TOPS Lab, rather than specifically with Wisconsin DOT. However, the TOPS Lab has been a longtime partner with WSDOT in its work zone management program. We developed and maintain the Wisconsin Lane Closure System, or the LCS, which is a centralized scheduling and approval system for all highway, road, and lane closures statewide, covering about 12,000 closures per year. That's been operational since 2008. I was also the project manager for the LCS, as well as the TOPS lead for our 2020 FHWA Work Zone Data Exchange demonstration project with WSDOT. I guess I'd say in a nutshell, the WZDX has been a catalyst for Wisconsin, to modernize its work zone management systems, looking at both improving work zone data quality as well as interoperability between its work zone and traffic management systems. In order for us to achieve a compliant WZDX data feed, we upgraded how work zone event data is entered and managed within our LCS, and also developed internal APIs and web services to allow LCS to share work zone event data with the WSDOT Advanced Traffic Management System, or the ATMS. And then the ATMS in turn generates the WZDX for Wisconsin. And then taking the WZDX work zone and device feeds together, this process has also generated an opportunity for Wisconsin to pilot and eventually incorporate connected work zone device information to further improve work zone data quality with respect to time and location details.
Awesome, thank you very much. Mark, you're next up. I think you're in the same boat I am. We're US DOT, so we don't necessarily actively manage work zones on a daily basis. So I can skip you for this question if that's all right with you, and pick back up with question 2, unless you have something you'd like to offer for this particular one.
Maybe I'll quickly offer that rather than just focusing on the work zone management way and how this was a different approach for work zones, this has also been a different approach for the development of the WZDX specification has been a different approach to collaborating among groups to develop a data specification. We adopted more of an agile format. We collaborated openly on GitHub. It wasn't a traditional standard systems engineering process, which I think maybe had some pros and some cons, and we can debate those another time. But yeah, it's been an interesting process to kind of change the way in which we collaborate on developing that kind of product.
Great. And Kapil, word to you.
Yes, so I'd say, yeah, we as Metropolitan Transportation Commission agency, that's our agency's name, but we are a regional planning agency for the San Francisco Bay Area. And so we don't manage the work zones ourselves, but we have developed a front end and we have a whole system where we are gathering work zone data from cities, counties, around in the Bay Area, and also Caltrans. We gather all that work zones data, and we have developed a database with a user interface, and then from there we produce the WZDX feed. And so we have two options to gather this data. We either accept a work zone WZDX feed if any city or county is producing it. And then the other option is we're providing this UI that we're offering to smaller cities that are not able to, they don't have the resources to generate a WZDX feed. They can come in and log their work zones using a map interface. And that's how we take that information and we pass it on to downstream data users. And so, yeah, we are quite involved in WZDX data, but we're not managing work zones ourselves.
True. Okay, well, thank you very much. Some great responses. Next question, I'm going to dig a little deeper into what we're using WZDX for collectively. One of the goals of WZDX is to provide a mechanism to communicate more specific information about work zone activity than is conveyed with your typical basic pin on a map type information that you might get in a classic navigation app or something like that. As useful as that information is, sometimes we need to know more. Specific use case for using the WZDX is to enhance work zone safety using publication of the active status of work zones or validating the active status of work zones. Can you speak to this or any other specific use case that for you, WZDX has been instrumental to communicating more information about work zone activity? And I'll go to Neil. Or do we want to mix it up? I don't want.
Either way.
Well, all right, you got started, so I'll let you finish.
All right. So again, as an early adopter of WZDX, implementation of the feed is part of our work zone manager application that we were building. We took on the premise that we wanted to have better data related to traffic control operations and work zone, and being able to use that information to not only push it directly to the motorist out on the thing, but also to allow us to actually do some operational checks and balances on our work zone. And as you mentioned, we had won the US DOT Federal Highway grants for implementation. And at that time, our focus was to figure out how, when we had devices out in the field, how we could standardize what information was being captured by them. The thought process was we didn't want 50 states having 50 different measures for capturing that information. So we set out on that effort to develop, the device feed. And now, like Wisconsin, we have a new lane closure request tool that was built 100% to kind of follow all of the WZDX requirements. So we're not only capturing better information, we are now able to automatically associate that when we do have devices in the field. This was something we just actually launched last week. So it's still We don't have a ton of devices out there yet, but we are working towards getting that implemented into our operational practices.
Excellent. Thank you. That's fantastic to hear. Skylar?
Yeah. So the Workzone Data Exchange gives us all this foundation to build off of, and I feel like the evolution for an agency or an agency growing, the next step is then that verification of the Workzone. So improving the accuracy of just this plan. We kind of know where the Workzone is going to start and stop, and the start and end times. And that's where Iowa DOT is really at, of how do we improve or verify that these work zones are actually active. And the big focus that Iowa DOT has made is on the use of connected arrow boards. So using the connected arrow boards to, whenever they turn on, they're associated with the work zone, and then that work zone is now updated to that specific location. And through the WZDX, we can say that that work zone is verified. So as part of the demonstration grant, that was one of our key focuses, was to get our ATMS to produce a WZDX, just like what Neil was talking about, but then also have that capability of linking arrow boards to the work zones to have that verification in the feed. And so Iowa DOT has been using connected arrow boards, or requiring connected arrow boards on all state roadways for the last 2 years. So we have a lot of that data from the field. Since the demonstration grant ended probably a year and a half or so ago, we've had that capability of operators in our traffic management center associating an arrow board to the work zone and showing that that's verified. Beyond just the traditional WZDX, we've also enhanced our 511 system, that if you go to Iowa's 511, in the construction icons, you'll start to see a little green check mark in the bottom left corner of the icon for the work zones. That gives a little confirmation that this is verified by, it says a smart device, but it's really a connected device, using the proper terminology. But saying that we have full confidence that that work zone is out there, because there's an arrow board that's out there that's communicating that it's on and it's active, and this is the precise location. So that's one of the heavy emphasis we've been focusing on in Iowa, is improving that verification of the work zone.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. Stephen?
Yeah, great, thanks. Yeah, it sounds like Wisconsin is probably in a similar place as Massachusetts and Iowa. You know, the first phase of our Wisconsin WZDX project was focused on incorporating Workzone event data from our Wisconsin lane closure system. This is a scheduling system, so those records are typically entered, days to a week ahead of time. So it's pretty good, but it's in the terms of WZDX, it's planned or estimated data. We had talked about planned versus active work zone attributes for a long time, but it hadn't really seen it formally baked into a specification until the WZDX. Before that, our LCS system was the sole source for real-time work zone information for 511 and for purposes of traffic management center situational awareness. We're now in our second phase, which is geared towards incorporating connected devices, to update the WZDX estimated time and spatial elements from the LCS into field verified status values. And then this transformation occurs within the ATMS, which integrates both the LCS and connected device information. We've been piloting the use of connected arrow boards and location markers on highway and local road work zones, both to understand their performance, along with what the minimum requirements might be to scale this solution. And then our local road work zone pilots are being conducted through an active USDOT SMART grant.
Awesome, thanks. Mark?
Sure. So again, I'm not really at an agency that's working on work zones, but I can speak to one aspect of the specification that I think no one has quite hit on yet, and that's one of the later changes that we made were to accommodate mobile work zones, which have a particularly tricky representation of, well, the WZDX generally, we've talked about being able to communicate both planned work zones in the future and active areas at this point, and the different spatial extents of a planned work zone that's going to cover 20 miles over the course of a day, but at any given time, it's going to be only a very short segment of that roadway. was a tricky nut to crack from a data representation standpoint, and now it's in there, and I think we're excited to see how that gets used out in the field, if it can help drivers pin down and know that, okay, maybe there's a work zone somewhere in this stretch, but now I know that I'm actually coming up on it right here, and I need to pay extra attention to that.
Fantastic. And Kapil.
I would say yes. We are, so there's a couple of ways how we are verifying this data, or there's obviously, as some of you spoke about lane closure system, we are also importing data from Caltrans LCS system. And it's not a WZDX feed, but we have a transformation where we are taking the data and putting in WZDX format. And a lot of times within that data, we don't receive full geometry of the closure. We get either like few 2 points or something like that, 2 geographical points. And so our system is able to generate that geometry for that. And we have some algorithms to make sure that it is as accurate as possible. And then obviously there are other sources where we gather data too, like we gather data from cities or in local authorities for the roads. And so we give our access, or the system access is provided to authorized people who are aware of the closures and who are authorized to enter those closures in our system. And so that's how we make sure that data is accurate. And on top of that, we also have our own 511 TIC operations that also monitor, especially they monitor more for the highways. And so if there's any planned work or anything, then they make sure that that data is accurate, and they communicate with Caltrans and get the right information and provide it to our system. So yeah, that's how we verify and make sure our data is accurate.
Excellent. Great responses. I really appreciate that. So, I think the value that we're seeing with the WZDX, from what I'm hearing from all the responses, the ability to kind of get a handle on just the activities themselves, and then with the benefit of having the standard, the standard data environment for this, you can use that to start to dig a little deeper on quality control and data capture and some of the other things that are a more challenging aspect of this. So, but at least you don't have to worry about, managing your own in-house specifications. So that helps take the load off of, one part of the equation. So, the next question kind of takes that to the next step here. The function of the WorkZone data exchanges has been described as, virtualizing operations or the events that create disruptions to operations. And this is kind of analogous to the idea of digital twinning of the physical space, which is a pretty big issue with the building information modeling right now. So the idea of virtualizing the what's happening on the ground so that it can be easily kind of digested. And we're all sitting in an office, we all can't. We're not visually looking at what's happening in the field all day long, but kind of extending that TMC function to a better understanding of the disruptions. The work zones are one type of that operational disruption, and extending that model to address other types of non-recurring events, including weather, incidents, emergency response. Like I was talking about before, that's a big focus for our managing disruptions to data exchange program, is sort of evolving the WZDX into a more broader focus to manage disruptions using the data. And I would just be interested in hearing your thoughts on this subject, from whatever perspective you can speak to it from. So I'm gonna take the load off Neil for the first response this time, and I'm gonna go to let's go to Stephen Parker. Get us started off with this one.
Sure. Okay. Well, I think as everyone who's listening, and certainly who works in this field knows, there's just a range of emerging opportunities to provide WZDX and MDOD related information to travelers, drivers, vehicles, and so on. It's really staggering and exciting. However, my focus is a little bit more traditional, kind of looking at the center-to-center communications and following a similar kind of design pattern that we have for sharing LCS data with our ATMS. Like the Wisconsin lane closure system, the TOPS lab has supported the integration of real-time computer-aided dispatch, or CAD, traffic incident data into the WisDOT Traffic Management Center and ATMS since 2008. We have a system called InterCAD that currently incorporates CAD traffic incidents from 4 major metropolitan 911 dispatch centers, along with the Wisconsin State Patrol, which has statewide coverage. And then this data exchange essentially converts proprietary CAD messages into the IEEE 1512 ITS standard for emergency management centers, which I believe is an early 2000 standard. The process has worked well, but there's a great deal of customization required to incorporate new CAD systems, and the IEEE 1512 standard itself hasn't really been widely adopted. And it also doesn't have a lot of the modern kind of things that we're talking about today, like the ability, for example, to incorporate field-based sensor verification of traffic incidents, similar to how the WZDX device feed works. So, in my opinion, a harmonized MDOD incident data dictionary and message specification would go a long way to streamline and standardize incident data sharing between domains, such as public safety and traffic management, and could have a similar impact on traffic incident management, or TIM, activities within a traffic management center context as the WZDX does for work zone event management.
Awesome.
I'll leave it at that.
I may ask you to use that as a soundbite later on. But thank you. Let's go to Kapil.
Yeah,
this time.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for the opportunity. And I feel like this is pretty important. Work zone data exchange, obviously the basics, or the WZDX that is developed as a specification, it does provide a good standard. But along with that, there is more opportunity attached to it, as we have been discussing here. That it's not just work zones, there's other disruptions, and we don't want to go, like, as an agency and my team particularly, we would love to have something that's one specification or one data source for all the disruptions on the road. It just helps to simplify things much more than having 2 or 3 feeds for work zones, then other type of disruptions and all that. And on our part, we've already explored that, and we have kind of we're using the current WZDX spec. It's kind of not our spec or our feed. Our feed has 2 data endpoints that you could explore. One is fully compliant, and the other one we are kind of breaking the spec, and we're adding other disruptions on the road. Like, we receive data from CHP, California Highway Patrol, and those are all incident data. And we take that and we convert it into a WZDX type format, and we have added to our data feed. And similarly, we have special events, like if there's a game going on, if there's a concert somewhere at a big arena, there's it's not a work zone, but obviously there's going to be traffic disruptions because people are going in, coming out, and all that information. So we would want all that information to be in one space, in one feed. And so that's where we are already breaking the spec. If you open up our feed, you'll see all that information in there. And you're breaking it, we're trying to add that information. And so having that in one place would be wonderful. That's all I would say. So yeah, it's a great opportunity. It should be expanded to add more load disruptions and disruptions on the road. Yeah.
Great. If I can expand on when you say breaking the WZDX feed, is I guess what I'm what I'm hearing is that you're using the capability of the WZDX communicate information generally on, work zones to communicate information on these other type of events using whatever. Yeah. Well, that's fascinating, and I think we're going to want to have your input on this process as we move forward with MDOD and some of the data specification work on that. So I'll you might have got yourself in trouble with letting us in on that. So
No, happy to contribute as much as we could. We're excited for this. Yeah.
So let's go to Skylar. Anything to share on thoughts about expanding into other non-recurring events?
Yeah, we've had the benefit lately of working along the I-80 coalition. So it's a coalition of states that are trying to, one of the goals is trying to standardize the data that we have. And so one of the early things the spec committee did that I'm helping Iowa DOT look into was how did truck parking, work zone data exchange, and event feeds vary across the state. And the benefit of the WZDX is we're fairly consistent. The only major changes between most of the states that are producing it along the I-80 coalition was the version number and whether we are using line strings or multi-points. All the other data were consistent. It shows the value in the work that we put into the WZDX. The event feed, on the other hand, we had 163 different unique attributes across the 5 or 6 states that we looked at, and 36 of those fields had just different names. So one state might call it lat, one state might call it latitude, the other state might call it the start lat. So again, they're not major differences, kind of like what Stephen was talking about, but it's just customization that you have to make of how do you interpret each of those fields, or each of the fields within the feeds. And then another 61 of the fields were only used by a single state. So these are unique things like one of them I remember was something to do with the Amish in Pennsylvania, and or whether a PennDOT employee was involved in the accident. And like those are good fields that we probably want to be included in these types of feeds, but we need to standardize them so that they can be used by everybody and across the nation. And really, if we want to get this into vehicles or different systems, people aren't going to want to do one-offs or custom integration for every single state or the Bay Area or any other municipality or jurisdiction that's producing these sorts of feeds. So having a standard for a lot of this data is critical and a way we need to continue to pursue and move forward towards.
Excellent. Neil, let me go to you next.
Yeah. So this is one of those questions that open up a whole avenue. For us, we're what's called an open data state, and we have been for years, where when we have incidents or even prior to WZDX implementation, anything that gets put into our event reporting system is made available to anyone that wants to pick it up. So it's obviously pushed to our 511 system, but the mapping service companies, and I guess this goes back to my whole premise of why we needed a standardized device feed. If no mapping company is going to pull up Massachusetts specific incidents, they're not going to do their own logic to digest our feed on that aspect. So the need for standardization on incidents is clearly evident, so that we are pushing the information so that it's a uniform format, so that it would be worthwhile. So instead, we're 100% crowdsource based. When what's being shown on like the mapping incidents, like Waze, for example. So we've had some internal discussions. We're in the process of putting in a new ITMS system, and part of that would be to work towards the standardization on those data feeds. And we're definitely lacking on the event reporting. Some of our maybe larger events we do, but we don't do a very good job on the event stuff unless an incident is called in. So we're lacking. So I'm very enthused by what's happening in some of the other areas, and I will bring it to my folks.
Great. And Mark, I'm going to come to you last on this one. I think your involvement with the work zone data working groups, kind of lends an interesting perspective to, how we might proceed with, similar effort to integrate other types of non-recurring events. So I'll give you an opportunity to talk to that.
Sure, I'll touch quickly on an effort that was tangentially related or kind of integrated with the Workzone Data Working Group. There was a group several years ago that was focused exclusively on opportunities to extend the specification to other types of events. And one of the tasks that that group took on was developing a version of WZDX for incidents by weather or crashes or special events. And they only got to do one iteration, and so that leaves some room for improvement in future versions. It was heavily reliant on the TMDD, which led to lots of humorous conversations about all of the different enumerations that the TMDD includes, including hot air ballooning disrupting the flow of traffic. So there's maybe some opportunities for streamlining as we continue working with that data specification content going forward. And I think we've all been talking about a lot of the similarities between Workzone and incident data, and how if it's a disruption to the roadway, a driver or a traveler would like to know whether that from the same place, whether it's a Workzone or an incident or a special event. All of that information is useful to come from the same place. But on the agency side, a lot of times agencies are sometimes the last to know about an incident. We're learning from Waze or CAD systems and all that, and there are maybe more focus as we get into that area of work on standardizing the intake of information just as much as the output of information. Similarly, on weather, we've had a lot of focus over, I think, several decades on collecting and streamlining ESS, environmental sensor station data, but we don't yet really translate that into actual roadway impacts. So the flavor of work that needs to be done is going to vary depending on the area, and as well as a little bit depending on the people that are involved.
Great. And I apologize for not noting this earlier, but I just got dropped a note that there's, if we're bringing up acronyms that others might not be familiar with, let's try to be conscious of maybe spelling it out the first time. I know that's hard to do in conversation, but anyway, just wanted to bring that up. We have, I think we've got time for another question, and then maybe pivot to the audience for questions after that. So this last question leans into the idea of the transcontinental corridor integration. Skylar, I know you got into that a little bit talking about I-80. So I guess I'll start with you. I-80 is obviously kind of one of those key corridors where there's a good opportunity. There's an enthusiastic coalition that's pre-existing that has a specific interest in data integration. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the idea of the transcontinental corridor integration, and what opportunities exist, or what challenges we're facing, or anything along those lines.
Yeah, and we have the benefit of having two good corridors with the I-80 coalition, and then we're also part of the I-35 coalition. And so
right.
Some of those are actually kind of crossroadings, because we're trying to do the same thing in both of those, of having common data across the corridor. So if a driver drives along the corridor, they're going to get data in a standard format, or being able to get that into a standard format across the corridor. And so again, that's where a lot of the focus has been on us all agreeing of what standards we're going to use, or if there isn't a standard, trying to figure out what's the way, or what's those critical elements, kind of like what we did with the Workzone Data Exchange, or what those base elements that we want to use and continue to pursue forward with those data elements. So Workzone Data Exchange, it was a low-hanging fruit, just because a vast majority of the states, whenever you show that map, are already producing WZDX. For that, a big focus is going to be on how do we take it to the next level of having verified work zones, so that whenever drivers are driving on the interstate, that they're actually getting verified work zones, and not just the planned or estimated work zones. And then events, which I just talked about in the last question, is another focal point, and what those critical elements are. And then truck parking, it's not necessarily event or work zone feed, but it's a critical part of, for both of those corridors. There is a lot of freight movement, and we get a lot of freight movement through the state of Iowa, either producing or just passing through to go through from a lot of different distribution centers. So it's a critical part of our infrastructure, and we want to make sure that they have the information or the details of where truck parking is available and what that availability is in real time.
Fantastic. I'm glad you brought up the truck parking as sort of an example outside of the classical realm of disruptions. And I think it's a point worth making that, we recognize that, work zone data exchange and MDODE it's one of a broad ecosystem of types of information that are really in dire need of some measure of standardization or coordination between states, so that the information that's being communicated in one agency is easily digestible by everybody else. Like a freight routing outfit, for example. I mean, they need to know what's going on, truck parking availability and weather and work zones, potentially on a national scale, just to do what they need to do. So, that's one, glimpse into a use case that I think the architecture, the data architectures and the business processes that we're trying to establish for work zones and disruptions here, we see those linking closely with, the broader discussion of, using the national ITS architecture to establish a, kind of a roadway digital infrastructure that can communicate that information, for not just, kind of the traditional operations, but a lot of the other stuff too. So, all right, with that aside, let me I want to hear from the real experts. So let me pivot back to you guys. Stephen, you want to, you have any thoughts on that? I'm trying to think of a big interstate corridor. You've got a lot of interstates, and so I know the interstate communication is a big issue. So maybe you can speak to that with some of your neighbors.
Sure. I'd say from the multi-state context, we've been working with the Lake Michigan Interstate Gateway Alliance, or LMIGA, which is maintained through University of Illinois Chicago. And they've been in the process of upgrading their regional travel information system to incorporate WZDX from its partner states. However, just to kind of maybe take a left turn, I was thinking about this a little bit differently, and I'd maybe like to kind of focus my remarks on our current SMART grant, which is geared towards incorporating the local agency work zones into our statewide WZDX feed. And the reason I like to bring that up is because I think that's a level of scale as well that in some respects is also new or uncharted territory for state agencies. You're thinking about how to incorporate the local side of things. So when I think about local road work zones, it brings, I would say, a host of complex and unique issues compared to highways, such as bicycle and pedestrian and other vulnerable road user access, and typically has very direct impacts on critical routing, such as the ability for emergency services to reach a destination. From the Wisconsin side, we do not believe a centralized lane closure system like we have for highways is a scalable solution for the local road context. And so we've been largely focused on how to best leverage the connected work zone devices to sort of automatically discover and monitor work zones on the local roads. And so kind of, going back then to sort of, I guess, the same thing we've been talking about, having that standardized work zone data dictionary and message specification is really essential, I would say, to make this work on a broad scale. And that concept really extends readily to sort of the broader MDODE context of incidents and other planned events on the entire roadway system and not just on the highway system.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm glad you brought that up. I think the transcontinental corridor integration is one level of integration, kind of on a getting broader, but the idea of coordinating with the multiple municipal agencies that are also contributing this information. I think that's an equally valid use case in terms of the need for integration how all that works together. So I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you. Neil, let me turn to you on this question.
Yeah, I'll just, with New England, we're so close, our states and stuff like that. So something in one state, it generally impacts the rest of us somehow. And that's one of the areas we could probably do a much better job of that intercoordination with the interstate connectivity. We had 2 significant incidents, one in Rhode Island, one in Connecticut, where they called us for help with getting the word out and trying to divert trucking, commercial vehicles and stuff. But it'd be nice if our operations centers actually had information on impacts just like over the border somewhat, or at least for some distance, because right now we look at only our state, but there could be a major incident that happens right over the line that we don't pick up without using social media or probes type stuff. So it's definitely lacking. It's something that I think this is the group that we could probably take on or try to move the needle on.
Excellent. Yeah, no, certainly I think we're going to be positioning ourselves to begin a lot of that stakeholder engagement to start talking about these things. So yeah, consider this sort of an invitational opening discussion in that regard. So thank you. Kapil, let me turn to you. I do know we have limited time, so maybe.
Yeah. I know. So I don't have much to add here because we're we're a regional agency and we don't touch borders with any state. We're far away from state borders. But I do feel it's an important thing, coordination and bringing all that data together from different states. That's very important for the road users and the end users that we have. Yeah, it's critical. That's all.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Mark, I don't want to leave without offering you the opportunity, but
I appreciate that. I don't have anything to add. These guys covered it well.
All right. Thanks. So with that, I want to extend a gigantic thank you to this panel. This was, I really appreciate your willingness to participate, and the input today is just fantastic. I've been taking notes and I've learned a lot myself. So thank you again, and I guess I'll turn it back over to Matt if we have a little bit of time for questions, maybe.
Unfortunately, we have to transition to our next session in just a moment. So
Okay.
We're going to go ahead and end now. But thank you guys again. Big virtual round of applause for you guys for an excellent session. And for the rest of you watching, we are going to go ahead and power down now and start up in just a few minutes with our final session, the FHWA Work Zone Training Grantee Showcase.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.